Hey everyone, and welcome back to another week of 3PL live sessions. Myself, Cameron Robertson, CEO of 3PL Systems, and the co-host Michael Sternberg, Director of Sales. Happy Friday! Today we're bringing on Anderson Camp, the CEO, the founder of ReliaFuel. Hey Anderson, how you doing?
Hey everybody, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Anderson, let's kick it off. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what led you to start ReliaFuel?
Yeah, of course. So I actually cut my teeth in the Navy driving ships and managing engineering equipment. As you can imagine, we're in the business of doing risky things. The key is just to do them well, not take unnecessary risks without unnecessary rewards. A lot of guys are getting after it in the Red Sea with all the volatility out there right now. So you're kind of seeing seeing exactly how risky it can be sometimes. A big part of the job I did and the job a lot of my colleagues did as well is risk management. So much so that we had a formalized system to kind of do it. It's called operational risk management, and we borrowed it from the aviation community. It's a multi-step process, but really the whole point is to identify, mitigate, and then really work through risks and make sure even when you're taking risks, you're doing it in the smartest way possible. So to get out of the Navy, I took that expertise from figuring out how to handle risks and started ReliaFuel make risk mitigation around fuel accessible within the supply chain. So yeah, that's how I got into it. Just Navy taught me a lot about how to make things operate in a less volatile and risky way.
So, Anderson, let's back up a little bit. I want to unpack your learnings and thoughts on risks in general. How long were you in the Navy? And I'm sure that kind of formed a lot of your ideas and opinions around risks that you brought into what you're doing today. So let's make sure we unpack that a little bit. So tell me about risk, what it means to you, how you think about it. Unpack that process a little bit more, and help me understand you and who you are and the way you view risk.
Yeah, for sure. So Navy for 5 years. Went to the Naval Academy as well. So kind of grew up in the Navy, I guess you would say. Yeah, and it's interesting. There's no career out there, in my opinion, that gives you as much responsibility as quickly as being a junior officer in the military. So graduated, went to my first ship, and quickly was in charge of a division of 5 to 20 people, depending on the day. And actually, our whole job was maintaining the damage control equipment on our ship. So this is equipment we use to respond when things goes bad, right? So talk about being aware of the risks of what's going on around you. And really, the whole process I kind of alluded to with operational risk management. Step one is identifying risks. We do that a couple different ways. My favorite is called a pre-mortem. Basically, you sit down at the start before you do anything and think about, okay, if this fails, why will it have failed, right? What if we're sitting 6 months from now here experiencing a failure? Why did that failure take place? And it forces you to remove kind of the rose-colored glasses and say, like, okay, it already failed. That happened. So we're not going to say that I'm going to push through this problem, or my drive or whatever is going to make sure I succeed here. Failure is assumed. So what happened? And it really brings up some good points when you're sitting around a table with people and have to assume that the risks you took were too great and you failed. The interesting thing about the Navy, though, is you don't really have a choice a lot of times in the mission you're doing, and therefore the risks you're
Mm.
taking on. All you can really do is make it as safe and as likely an outcome as for success as possible. So mitigation is really just the huge name of the game. Um, Whether it's with extra safety precautions, just whatever the case might be. And really, my job within that division is kind of how we refer to our units within the Navy, within that damage control division, was mitigating the risk of fire, flooding, whatever the case may be. So that's one of the ways we made sure that, if a pump broke and a pipe burst and suddenly an engine room was filling with water, we would have the equipment we would need to combat that. So there's nothing we can do about the risk that flooding might happen, but we can do something about the fact that if flooding happens, we're able to respond effectively. So it really, just like any company, right? You're in the business of taking risks, right? That's how you operate. Like, there's no decision you make on a day-to-day basis that doesn't carry risk with it. But you'd be a fool not to think about how to, limit the negative outcome of that risk should things go wrong, right? So it was a really reinforced education A quick education too, just because from day one, was responsible for those decisions, and people bearing the brunt or the results of those decisions. So yeah, that's kind of how I came at it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm sure your background in the Navy, and especially the position you held in the Navy, kind of translates over to your role as CEO and founder of ReliaFuel, because you're constantly dealing with risk when you start a company, and
Yeah,
it's a lot of risk starting a company, and a lot goes into it, and you're not sure if you're
yeah,
going to succeed. But switching over to fuel, where is the fuel risk in supply chain? So what
yeah,
drove you to start ReliaFuel, and what exactly are you solving for the industry with ReliaFuel?
yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So really, within the Navy, keeping engineering equipment running involves a lot of supply chain, as you can imagine. So as I was on my way out of the Navy, I kind of just applied that operational risk management construct to the supply chain at large. Now, obviously, incredibly complex, and there's a lot of different places things can go wrong within the supply chain. But one place that stuck out to me was fuel. Part of that's from my background. The Navy uses a lot of fuel. I dealt with, diesel and jet fuel every day, all day, just to keep us running. But the other part of it was what was happening in the market, right? The market, on top of everything else around COVID, was dealing with incredibly volatile fuel prices, and it was just killing margins for people. But the key, I think, to proper risk management is to kill the low-hanging fruit, right? Is to take care of the things that you can take care of. And while the direction of fuel is relatively impossible to predict, there are industries and players within those industries who are able to really successfully mitigate their exposure to fuel via financial markets. And what I found really is that the supply chain, most players within it don't have access to those tools. So really, when it comes down to it, what ReliaFuel does is appropriately prices risk around fuel for shippers, brokers, and carriers. If you're a broker offering all-in rates to shippers, whether you know it or not, you're assuming a lot of risk around the direction of fuel, right? If you're not including a fuel surcharge on those rates, then you're betting on the direction of fuel in one way or another. And you deserve to be compensated for removing that risk for your shippers. So what we really do is enable you to price that risk, whether you're going to sell that to your shipper, the fact that you're assuming that risk on their behalf, or just, make your rates appropriate for the benefit that you're offering your shippers. But when it comes down to it, what we do is help people price risk, because fuel is going to be a part of moving goods at the end of the day, right? It has to be. But it deserves a little bit more attention than it traditionally gets. The risks around it are quantifiable. It's done frequently in financial markets. It's just that it's not necessarily accessible within the supply chain. So that's what we do, is kind of make a traditionally kind of esoteric concept accessible to players within the supply chain, and really provide access to a fragmented market, because the supply chain is made up of millions of players, some of them small, some of them large, most of them somewhere in between, and they don't necessarily have the resources to protect themselves from risk around fuel. So that's what we do.
So, Anderson, let me ask. So, a lot of what we see with our clients on the brokerage side is, right, you have like a line haul plus fuel, right? And that's kind of how it works. And the fuel is going to depend on, right, where the fuel is at this week and what the government says the diesel price is at today,
Yeah,
right? Like that's just
right.
kind of how it works. And so, obviously, what you guys are doing here is different. Help me understand a little bit around, like, are you guys effectively like locking in a fuel rate that is going to be representative of the fluctuations in the price, and then on average you can say you can charge this, so then for your shippers, if I'm a broker, what you're able to offer is like a steady price, not like a line haul plus fuel that's going to fluctuate, but just like, here's the fuel price and it's steady. Is that kind of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, exactly. So we start where you start, exactly as described, right? You've got line haul plus fuel surcharge, and that's at the start of the relationship. What we essentially enable you to do is as a broker, offer that steady rate, like you said, without assuming risk around fuel yourself. So, normally if you were to cap that rate for your shipper, you would be the one bearing responsibility when something like 2021 or 2022 happens and fuel
Sure.
goes to the moon, right? But what we do is use financial markets to hedge that risk for you, so that you can offer your shipper a capped all-in rate, right? The line on the fuel are going to stay the same. If fuel drops because it's capped rather than locked in, your shippers are playing the cheaper rate, which tends to be a sticking point a lot of times. Like, I want to play the markets because if fuel drops down, then that's great for me, right? That's great. I appreciate that, and your shippers can still take advantage of that. But if fuel shoots up, your shippers keep paying that capped rate, that all-in rate that we just negotiated at the start of the contract, and then ReliaFuel, because we've used the financial tools that millions of players within the market are using to hedge fuel prices, we're able to compensate you, the broker, so that you're still getting paid what you would have been paid without the cap in place. So you can still pay, because ultimately you as a broker at the end of the day are responsible for getting that freight move, right? And carriers are expecting you to get paid for the normal fuel surcharge rate. So what we do is make sure you can do that profitably, right? We come back and make sure you get paid a market fuel surcharge rate. Because you've guaranteed to the shipper you can get that freight move for them, and if you don't, you're going to lose business. So yeah, that's where we come in, making sure that brokers get paid market fuel surcharge rates while shippers only have to pay a capped fuel surcharge rate. The market, I think it's the right decision, has decided ultimately that shippers, because they're the ones benefiting from the services, should be the ones paying for fuel, right? That's how the fuel surcharge system is set up, so that shippers are the ones bearing fuel volatility. I think that's great. I think that's the right way to do it. But I also think brokers should be providing shippers the option to offload that risk, right? To mitigate that risk, like we talked about at the top, if it's important to them. And they can do that with ReliaFuel, right? We can allow you to offer shippers a capped, mitigated risk around fuel without you assuming that risk yourself. Yeah. So just, not every shipper cares, right? Just like some people are fine with a little bit more risk than others. People like Vegas, some people don't. But there's a good subset of people out there to whom stability is really important, and maybe that fuel risk is existential for them, right? Maybe that fuel risk is make or break because their markets are thin, they're in a really competitive market, whatever the case might be. So yeah, I think helping brokers provide some value to shippers around fuel costs by eliminating or mitigating risk for them is a huge value for the right shipper.
Makes sense. So switching gears slightly, how is the software going to work? Is this ultimately integrating with TMS providers, or how is the brokerage going to utilize this in their day-to-day workflow so that it's not a weight to them, meaning it automates something for them? How does that work?
For sure. I might offend you here. I know you're a tech guy. We're proudly very low tech right now, right? It's a very simple invoice-based process. So at the onset of the relationship, I talked about where fuel's sitting, right, within a contract. We cap that fuel surcharge level at the start of a contract. You estimate the volume that you and your shipper are going to do over the course of, let's say, a 6-month contract. And then that's basically it. So based on that estimated volume, I'm estimating how much fuel you're going to use over the course of that 6-month contract. And if fuel goes above market rates from the start of the contract, that's the same thing as saying goes above the cap we worked out at the start, you get a check in the mail. And if it doesn't, you don't. So we're not getting lane to lane specific, getting into your business with your shipper. It's all estimated volume based at the outset of the relationship. So I don't need to sit on top of your TMS and see how many loads you move for that shipper. You and that shipper at the onset agreed to an estimated volume that you wanted to have covered by this fuel surcharge protection. And then you as the broker gets paid based on that estimated volume. So that's one of the kind of the key tenets of what we're trying to do, is make it as simple as possible. Make it one of those low-hanging fruit that I mentioned before for people to grab and mitigate. Because once you get into, like, I don't even need to know the name of the shipper you're doing this deal with, right? And that's important to me, because you should be the person dealing with your customers, right? As a broker, that's your side of the house. That's what you make a living doing, and that's why you're there, to provide them service. So for us, it's just basically a volume-based estimate, and you get a check in the mail every month if fuel moves above the cap rate at the beginning. So it makes it really simple to implement, because the more headache you add to something, the less value it adds to people.
So, Anderson, help me understand what goes into this calculation. Now, I'm not telling you, hey, give me the formula.
Yeah.
Tell me your secret sauce. And I'm sure there's a ton of factors, but if you could help identify maybe a few key elements that go into how you guys come up with this number.
Yeah.
And just kind of some of the factors that come into play. You alluded to some of the financial models that are more traditional, like with like stock markets and that kind of thing, and some of the tooling that you guys are taking advantage of. How does this all
Yeah.
come together?
Yeah. It's a good question. So I kind of mentioned before that it's really hard to predict what's the right way to say this? It's really hard to predict what the price of fuel will be a month or 6 months from now, right?
Sure.
But what we can tell is how volatile the markets are, and how volatile the markets are tell us basically how likely it is for a big change to happen over the course of the next months or the next 6 months. Um, and then the markets use that information, the volatility that's priced into any number of commodities, right? So whether we're talking about crude oil or refined diesel that you're putting into your truck, right? They all have volatility baked into their prices or associated with that commodity. The markets use that volatility to basically price the financial equivalent of insurance, and then that insurance allows us to price the risk. So when I'm talking about pricing risk around fuel, we're looking at how volatile fuel is for any given amount of time and how likely that volatility is to change over a length of time. So while it's hard to predict what the price of fuel will be, we are pretty sure most of the time about how volatile the price of fuel will be. So there's, you're seeing in the news now all the geopolitical instability, the supply and demand instability around fuel. All those things are driving price. I mean, diesel's up over the past 2 weeks, just on economic and geopolitical outlook. All those factors drive volatility. And influence the price of that kind of financial insurance that I mentioned. The good news is that there's huge banks out there who have looked at this for a really long time and are willing to basically make a bet and write the policy around fuel. So we at ReliaFuel don't take a stance on the direction of fuel. It's not a speculative game for us. It's purely a hedging game, right? So we're 100% hedged on the contracts that we have with our customers. It's not a speculative game. I'm not long or short oil. I'm simply neutral oil, right? Which is what you would want your head provider to be. There's been some interesting movements. This is not the first time someone within the supply chain has tried to make hedging accessible around fuel. Those efforts have gone badly when they start taking a stance on the direction of fuel. I hope my background made clear that I'm not interested in assuming risk where I don't need to assume risk. So that's one of our big mottos is we don't know what the price of oil is going to be 2 weeks from now. You don't know what the price of oil is going to be 2 weeks from now, and that's why we exist. So why would we take a stance on that, right? That's the whole point. But yeah, to long story short, volatility is the key, and that helps us price fuel.
Makes sense. So what long term, what are your ultimate goals with ReliaFuel? Is it going to spread out not only to brokers? Are you going to be going to shippers, or is that something that you're doing now already to carriers? Like what is the long term, 12 months, 5 years, whatever it may be?
Yeah, my goal is that every time somebody quotes their services to a shipper, it includes the option to cap the fuel surcharge, right? Anytime somebody reaches out to the shipper, they have the option, much like, when you're checking out on Delta and you get to the end of your ticket purchase and it gives you the option to check a box to add traveler's insurance. Personally, I don't add that traveler's insurance, but my mother-in-law does, right?
Neither do we.
Yeah, exactly. But my mother-in-law does because stability is important to her, right? So I want to provide my mother-in-laws of the world the option to hedge their risk, right? To mitigate their volatility around fuel in a really seamless way. So yeah, Cameron, the answer is yes. I'd like everybody to have the option of doing this, providing it to their customers, because through volume we'll find the people for who it's valuable to, and then their lives and their profit margins will be better for it. fuel's a tricky thing, right? And we've got the pain points over the course of the past couple of years where we've really seen how it can impact businesses and how it can kill profit margins. So my goal is that the next time that happens, and it's likely sooner rather than later, we've helped businesses position themselves to not only survive those turbulent times, but to thrive through them. Because the people who are well positioned around fuel, the next time major volatility hits, and the forecast for 2024 is that no one really knows what's going to happen, which is the perfect setup to a really volatile market. So my goal is that we can help those companies who have positioned themselves to mitigate their risk around fuel thrive through the next volatile times, because the people who have protection when the storm hits are the people who come out of the other side of the storm 10 times better, because they've done what their competition hasn't been able to do, which is thrive in turbulent times. So that's the goal.
So I'm gonna ask you a question, Anderson. This is me being selfishly curious. Knowing the industry, having learned a lot about the industry, having sold TMS to freight brokers for almost a decade, a little under a decade at this point. I'm curious how people are, how receptive people are to what you're doing, because I know it's a novel idea. Nothing about the merit of the idea. I just know it's a novel idea. And so anytime you're pitching, let's say, for lack of a better word, a new idea, concept, product to a market, you have sort of this tension that you have to come up against and able to get some traction for people to understand. The flip side of that, we sell TMS. TMS has been around forever. Every single person that we talk to is already using a TMS or they know what a TMS is, right? So that's not something that we have to deal with. I don't have to deal with proof of concept to somebody when I'm trying to sell them a TMS. Like, oh, your TMS, cool. I either love my TMS, don't talk to me. I hate my TMS, here's why, can you do it better? But with ReliaFuel, no one's gonna be like, oh, we already have a fuel hedging process in place, right? So how do you deal with that? I'm just really curious from my my go-to-market brain is spinning on that. I'm curious to your views on that.
I think it's fun. I'd rather be where I am than where you guys are. That's just maybe it's a personality thing. I don't know.
There are days, Anderson.
No, it's I enjoy the educational aspect of it to some extent, and that's a big part of it, right? It's like it's a long process to get to the point where somebody's comfortable, right? Somebody's familiar enough with the concept to feel good about it. But that moment of recognition is really exciting to me, I think, and the educational aspect of it is fun. So my goal within the market is to be the guy that people think of when they talk about fuel with a customer, right? The next time you're sitting down with a customer and that customer is worried about fuel surcharge movements over the course of the next couple of months, you think of Andy and you think of ReliaFuel. And if that's
we got
the case,
a fuel guy. We know a guy, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. No, just providing options, because there aren't enough options around fuel right now. They're just plain and simple. There's not, especially from the broker side of things. Shippers have a couple options. Brokers don't have many tools to provide to shippers. So I'm happy to be the first one through the door, doing some education, and talking to people. And if we can help, a dozen people, then I think I've done my job well. So, you've read the room correctly, right? There's a lot of education that has to go on before a broker's comfortable moving forward. But I'm happy to do that education because I think it's a worthwhile thing for them to be able to offer their shippers. So
great answer, man. Really, really,
that's a good answer.
Yeah.
So Anderson, we're coming near the end of our conversation today. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you and find out more about ReliaFuel?
Yeah, we've got a website, ReliaFuel.com. I'm on LinkedIn, always on LinkedIn. Happy to talk anytime. ReliaFuel.com or LinkedIn's probably the best two bets. Yeah, that'd be great.
Sweet. Any final thoughts or messages you want to leave with the viewers?
Just think about fuel more frequently, and because I know your customers are, right? Shippers care about fuel. They don't always have a conversation with brokers because brokers haven't had much to bring to the table, unfortunately. No fault of brokers. The fuel surcharge system works great for brokers, but it doesn't always work great for shippers. So when they come to you with things like fuel cost recovery programs, it's because they've been experiencing pain over the course of the past 2 years that you haven't necessarily been cognizant of. And I hope this doesn't sound preachy, because it's not. Brokers have an incredibly tough job. So of course, if they can just segment out fuel and let that ride via the fuel surcharge, that's the smart thing to do. The market is changing though. And if you want to be the brokers on the cutting edge of things, and start offering your shippers some services around fuel, so you can keep them happy and maybe keep things closer to the status quo, which might be better for you, ReliaFuel is an easy way to do that. And that's my closing
Sweet,
argument.
man. Sweet. Thanks for
Awesome.
coming on. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you guys so
appreciate
much. It was a
Anderson.
pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. All right. Anderson, or Andy, I guess he does go by Andy. We could probably call him Andy at this point. Andy from ReliaFuel. That was interesting. It's fuel is like this. It's almost like in this box in like freight brokerage. Like there's some people that get it, some people that don't get it. So I think it's cool that he's bringing light to it and a new strategy to it.
Absolutely.
So man, you and I had a hell of a week. Kansas City earlier this week, got back Wednesday night, been working, catching up. Next week we have Ryan Rogers from Tex Locate. So that should be a good show. He's doing a lot of cool things with their started as a tracking product and is now more of a driver communication tool from what we've seen. So excited to have him on. Cam, any final thoughts before we let everybody go for the weekend, give them back some of their day?
No, it's interesting to learn about fuel, and I didn't realize you build an entire business around it. So that was really cool to see. And yeah, excited to see Ryan Rogers joining us next week. Big fan of what they're doing over there at Tex Locate. Seems like really good service that they're providing. So excited to unpack that a little bit more.
Sweet. One final thing I will say, anybody who is still listening or anybody who listens to this on the replay, if there's a specific topic that you guys would want us to cover, or if there's a specific guest that you guys think we should have on that would be valuable, we're open to it. We know we don't know everything. So definitely let us know if you guys have ideas. We're open to it. We'll make a show out of it. We'll give you some credit and all that. Other than that, hope you guys have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.